This is the Foundations Unit, Objective Theories on How Government Began. I want you to think, if you look at the senior island assignment, we're on our plane, that's the entire senior class. These are people that you have been in class with for almost your entire school education. I know some of you have joined us your freshman year, your sophomore year, maybe in middle school, but you all have a pretty good understanding of what your senior class is like. So I want you to think, if we're on this senior island, we crashed our plane, there are no adults or no one over the age of 19 survived, and here we are, your entire senior class. You're not going to be rescued. Do you have a government? And if so, what kind? And that's one of your discussion questions, which I think is interesting. Because as you go through that discussion and your thoughts about whether you have a government or not, how does that government start? Where does that come from? So these are the four theories on how governments began. So let's look at those four theories. When we look at how governments began, these, like I said, are theories. They're not laws, but this is what political scientists, historians have talked about and tried to figure out as they looked at the history of all these different nation states or states. How did they begin? How did their government start? And so these are the four most most common political science theories that we have about how did governments begin. So let's think about United States. 1789 is when the United States officially began, not 1776. That's when we wrote our broke-up letter to King George. But 1789 is when the United States of America actually started. So the force theory is just like it sounds. The force theory says the government was created by force, strong arm tactics. It could be one person, it could be a group of people that band together, but they can take control over the territory, the land. And so if you're not strong enough, you are forced to submit. And that is the force theory. So a lot of our dictatorships are built upon force theory. A strong person or a group of people come to power and they make everybody else submit. Is that what the United States was founded on? Are we a force theory government? No, we most definitely are not force theory. So that's not how the United States started in 1789. Another theory is the evolutionary theory. And I don't want you to go all Darwin on me and say, oh, it's the survival of the fittest. No, that's not what this means in political science terms. Evolution theory is like the picture shows. It starts from family, clans, and tribes, and this tribal nation develops, and voila, you have a nation state. So it would be like on Senior Island, you have a group goes here, a group goes there, and they start having children and they start to have bigger families and maybe they become more clan-like. And then these clans grow and expand. And all of a sudden on your island, you might have 3 different tribal nations of 3 different senior sections that evolved from being stranded on this island. So that's what evolutionary theory is all about. It's you have a family head where they are the early government. They make the rules, the regulations, the enforcement. And over time, this family joins with other families and it grows and a clan is formed and then eventually a tribe. And then voila, the tribal nation has developed. We see this a lot of development with those nations that were nomadic and then they started to become agrarian in nature. In fact, we even call them tribal nations. And you'll see tribal nations, North American Indians, the Aborigines in Australia, and in Africa, there are a lot of tribal nations developed from this evolutionary theory, which explains some of the issues that they have today in forms of governing because of those tribal nation backgrounds. So when we look at the United States, were we evolutionary theory? No. That's not how the United States formed. So that is not the basis of our government forming. Now, those of you who have been in Western Civ 1 should have been introduced to the divine right theory. Divine means from God, divine inspiration, divine being, God's theory. Now, this is not in the Bible, but this is how political states were formed. But the thought was that God created the nation, and God, through birth, chose the monarch to rule. Now, that is not in the Bible, but that is how sometimes religion gets perverted for somebody's political means, right? So, divine right, God created this nation, and God chose who shall be the king. Right? And that's passed on through birth. And so you had to obey the king, because if you didn't, then you know where you're going to end up going. And so you don't want to go down there. That's a bad place. And so you would follow your king and do what the king said, because you don't want the alternative of what God would do to you. Like I said, this is not in the Bible, but that's how some people twist religion for their own political means. So, is this the United States in 1789? No. But was it the United States under King George and the colonies? Yes. King George ruled because God put him there and his family, and he will continue to rule because that is God's divine will. That is the king's divine right, because he was placed there. So, out of the Enlightenment period, that caused some issues for us, because as we were starting to think and we could read the Bible ourselves, and we realized there's nothing in the Bible about this divine right king thing. There's something not quite right here. And so that's where we get John Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu, and we're reading these writers in political theory and the Enlightenment, and Thomas Jefferson in France is hanging out with these Enlightenment thinkers in the salons, and it's coming back to the colonies, and we're thinking, there's got to be a better way for this government. If you are on Senior Island, are you going to pick a king? I don't know. But there's got to be a better way. And so that better way is what the United States took. We are the first nation to go with a social contract theory formed government. So we are the first in so many ways. That entrepreneurial spirit, you can see it in our roots in so many different things. But the social contract theory basically is this idea that you have these strong authorities, and they may not protect your rights. And everybody should have the right to their life. And everybody should have the right to liberty and their properties, or pursuit of happiness, doing what you want to do. And so the social contract theory says, man, these governments are just restricting our rights. They don't give us a say. There's no way to stop a bad king. There's no way to stop a bad dictator. There has to be a better type of government. There has to be. And so this is the idea that humans should be able to create a government where their rights aren't restricted by a bad king or a tyrannical dictator. There's got to be a way we can come up with a system that our property is protected, our life is protected, our pursuits of what we want to do is protected, but yet we do have a force to do that. And so Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, is the French philosopher who came up with this social contract theory. And how this social contract theory works, it is a contract. And just like any contract, a contract is between two people. And so in this situation, the two parties in the contract are the people and the government. Those are our two parties. Okay, so in any contract, each person or each party of the contract has to give up something to get something. So let's say you want to sell your car, and I need a car. So I'm going to buy your car. So the two parties are me, buyer, and you, the seller. So the buyer has to give up money to get the car. The seller has to give up the car, and they will get the money. So the same thing in a social contract theory in setting up a government. The two parties, the people and the government, and each side has to give something to the other. So government is going to give protection. What are they protecting? Our natural rights. As John Locke says, every single person is endowed by their creator with natural rights. Those natural rights are your life, your liberty, and your property. Thomas Jefferson says pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is getting whatever you want to collect. So, or do, whether it's land or baseball cards. So government must give protection to the people. What do the people give? And no, it's not rights. They don't give up their rights. No. The government's supposed to protect their rights. What people give up, and this might be one of the things that you have difficulty with on Senior Island. If you are a senior stuck in this island for life, are you going to give your consent to be governed with whatever government you decide to set up? See, people have to give their consent to be governed, not their consent to be enslaved. No, their consent to be governed, because this government has to protect your life, liberty, and property. Okay. So that's the social contract theory. Now, what happens if government doesn't protect your rights? Well, people have the right to revolt according to the social contract theory. Now, this is a theory. It's not United States law. So don't be starting a revolt. Don't be joining the Minneapolis protesters, rioters. No, that's not what that means. If government doesn't protect your rights, you have the right to revolt. That's why we had the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of our Independence is saying to Divine Right King George, hey, you're not protecting our rights. You're not protecting our life from the Indians that keep attacking us, and we're paying taxes for protection. You're not protecting our property because the Indians keep attacking us, right? And you're not protecting our pursuit of happiness, our rights to expand and move west, our rights to trade with whoever we want and make as much money as we can, right? There's a lot of issues that we had with King George under his government, divine right formed government. And so looking at these writers from the Enlightenment period, the United States says there's got to be a better way. Declaration of Independence, we're revolting because the king is not protecting our rights. That is our right. So don't be thinking you can revolt because you will be considered treasonous and put in jail. Now, one more thing, just to review all this, government has to protect our natural rights. Your natural rights are life, liberty, and property, and you are born with them. Every single person gets them. People have to give their consent to be governed, and then the contract is made. If government does not protect your rights, people can revolt. It's a theory, not a law. So that is our social contract theory. A couple of people I want to throw in there to make sure you understand and review. John Locke was the philosopher who came up with the idea that every person is born with natural rights, and your rights are life, liberty, and property. Thomas Hobbes first wrote this book, Leviathan, that said, yes, government should protect your natural rights, but he wasn't ready to go for the masses and the people to do it. He said you could have an enlightened king that could do it. And that's true. You could have a great dictator, or you could have a great king that could protect your rights. Doesn't always happen, but there are people out there who could protect your rights. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau is the person who put it all together and said, there has to be a better way. The social contract theory was developed by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the United States was the very first nation to implement the social contract. And the United States used the social contract theory for the very first time to make our government.